probably why. Now you'll be able to hear me. Can the people in the back hear me okay? Everyone in the front can hear me loud and clear. Excellent. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this next Heritage Talk at Hull Minster, courtesy of the 600th anniversary and the Heritage Lottery Fund, who are making this and these talks possible. My name is James. I'm the Heritage Manager at Hull Minster. I'm really delighted to be able to welcome you to this talk. Many of you will have attended our talks before, so you'll sort of know this gist, but in case you haven't attended our talks before, this is a series that we're running as part of our 600th anniversary every other week on Fridays, same time, same place, where we allow a platform for people to present local history here in Hull Minster, whether it's local academics, local historians, tour guides, or just people with a real passion for history who want to share it with you all. And today we're going to be covering a story that I think probably doesn't get its just desserts very well on the other side of the river, and East Hull, a place that admittedly I don't know very much about, so hopefully I'll be very well educated by this presentation. I won't pretend to know what I don't know. Colin Cooper's our speaker today. He's had, I think, quite a heavy hand in the Hull Civic Society over the past, so some of you might recognize him if you've been to similar talks in years past. And I will let him do the lion's share of this because you're here to listen to him and you're not here to listen to me. So without further ado, here's Colin Cooper on East Hull. I hope you enjoy the talk and please give him a warm welcome to the Minster. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My talk today is entitled East Hull Revisited, or more precisely, Holderness Road and Witham Revisited, and takes a look at the development of this important thoroughfare over 250 years. But why revisited, you may ask? It's often said that your earliest recollections stay with you the longest, and my earliest, more than 70 years ago, were of that part of East Hull where I was born and brought up and lived there for the first 24 years of my life. I have many happy memories of the area, but it's the buildings and other features of East Hull of my childhood which form my talk today. Of course, many people... Just get onto here, please. Just get on. Sorry, I've just got to get the mouse into the right position.
Trying to change slides.
Oh, no, it's all right.
Got it.
I'm just trying to get it round to that. It's a new one, I know. Oh, that's it.
Are you trying to change slides?
Yes,
you can go left and right here.
Can I do that one?
Yes, you can.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That'll be easier for me, actually. Sorry, thank you about that. The buildings and other features of East Hull of my childhood form the basis of this talk. Of course, many people would hardly notice these or give them a second glance, but they are a historic link with East Hull past and our ancestors who may have lived or worked there. But as regards a road through to East Hull and Holderness, there's been one for 700 years. Originally it was a right-of-way granted by the lords of the manor to the nuns of Swine to enable them to carts and animals to come from their priory to the port of Hull. Then, 3 years later, after Hull's Royal Charter of 1299, a Royal Commission authorised a road from the site of the much later North Bridge, thereby linking Hull with the neighbours such as Preston and Heddon. Heddon was then a very busy port, by way of Drypool, Sculcote, Sutton, in a somewhat roundabout way. Little building took place on east of the river for two reasons. The east bank had been heavily fortified by Henry VIII. He built 3 blockhouses, which you can see. You can see the river coming through the middle of the picture, and there was a north, one in the centre, and a southern blockhouse there. The north one was near to where North Bridge is. Then in King Charles II time, a citadel was built, almost where the Deep is at the moment, near to Mighton Bridge. Both of these were to protect the developing port of Hull, of course. However, because of this, there'd only one major structure east of the river, which was a sugar mill, built in 1731. It wasn't a success, and consequently, early sketches of East Hull show a very rural landscape, with a few houses and windmill dominated. As seen on this map, most of the Holness Road area was a huge wetland in the middle called Summer Gangs, which was a corruption of South Mere Gangs, a large lake or mere, or it could have possibly been summer, the season, where the cattle all went or ganged because there was nothing else they could do with the land. Other local names you see on here, for example, Ings, as in Sutton Ings, near the top of the picture, are from the word eng, which refers to grassland and marshy ground, and home, as in Brandsholm, and car, as in East Car, all have watery derivations. The drainage of the South Mere, however, was much improved because there was a land drain which was used by the monks of Mews, slightly to the north of Hull. That enabled their produce to be transported to the port of Hull. But in the 1700s, long after the monastery's dissolution, the drain was diverted to enter the River Hull, not near Sutton where it used to do, but much lower down, not far from where North Bridge is, not far from where, you probably know where Reckitt's and James Rickett Avenue is. It run round the back there. It greatly improved the drainage of the Summer Gangs pastures, and things began. There was a boom in the trade of the port as well at the time. Queen's Dock was opened in 1778, led to a demand for ships to be built. Huge revival of the whaling trade also started, and that led to the demand for shipyards, foundries, engineering works, oil mills. Soon a rapid growth east of the river began, and there was a population explosion, of course, with workers coming from the countryside. Sadly, this led to much poor quality housing in the area, poorly built homes in East Hull, and all this culminated with a very, very serious cholera epidemic in 1849, which saw the death of many people in this poorly drained area. So we'll now bring our journey across the river to the mystic east, as some of you may call it. Firstly, we must cross North Bridge and glance at the river. This is the river which divides city into two halves, east-west, or FC and Rovers if you're interested in rugby. We must all go back 40 years for this. This is my favourite picture of the river, showing a vibrant commercial waterway with many mills, factories and shipyards, such as the one in Lime Street, with a brand new coaster ready to be launched sideways into the river. How things change. The talk tonight will concentrate a lot on the effects of East Hull's three big industries: Rank Hovis, that's Joseph Rank, Reckitt's, Isaac Reckitt, and the Priestman brothers, all three of which can trace their humble origins to this area. Their enterprises were on the cutting edge of British and the world technology at the time. You wouldn't believe it got all happening in Hull, but it spread the name of Hull to the four corners of the earth and provided work and opportunities for thousands of Hull families, as I'm sure you all know. You might recall that at one time, almost everybody in Hull you spoke to had a close friend or relative working at Ranks, Reckitt's or Priestman's. So let's pass over North Bridge. This was the fourth. No, this is a Stiazer rolling bascule bridge built in 1931. It's Grade 2 listed, and it's the fourth bridge to be built on that site or thereabouts since Henry VIII first authorised the bridge in 1541 as part of the fortifications. We now cross the river and we see this former Fordyke stream. As mentioned earlier, the northern part of the stream was diverted. The map over there at the top shows where it used to run, with a windmill almost in the middle of the picture, and it came out near Warne. But later on, the new outfall was built. It greatly increased its capacity, and the drain's outfall generally led to the draining virtually of the South Mere and put a large part of East Hull available to be developed. Next below we see a sketch of the Fordyke stream behind Witham, it shows a tranquil stream, very attractive, looking westward from North Bridge. Whether it was as idyllic as this, with wildlife and anglers on the bank, I do not know. However, it was an improvement. We've now reached Witham, just over the bridge. It was formerly a narrow lane called Blockhouse Lane, as a nod towards the old blockhouse, the old fortifications. Around 1860, much of the land came into the ownership of Henry Witham, who had land either side of the road, including, believe it or not, the Muckgarths, which is where all the night soil was deposited. So it wasn't a particularly wholesome area. The first residents were poor people such as wheelwrights, cart makers, and small shops and coaching inns, reflecting the position on the route from Hull to Hornsey. Also a lot of timber yards, because of the new Victoria Dock which had opened in the 1850s. Witham's link with coaching and stables go back from a long, long time. There was a need for horses, rullies, wheelwrights, and as long ago as 1846, Mr. Annison appeared in directories as wheelwrights. 13 years later was a coach business, and in the 1870s as a carriage builder, posting and livery stables, and a cab proprietor. Business occupied various sites in Witham and finally ending up just near to North Bridge after realignment when New Bridge was built. Ahead we can see the imposing structure which was for many years, from 1900, Annison consisted of a chapel of rest, offices, and a large carriage house at the rear, plus a ramp and stables at the first floor level. You note the lack of windows, which is unusual, but there were others in other parts of the country like that. But it was certainly unique in this area. This rare and fascinating building was threatened because they were going to build a great big roundabout at the end of Freetown Way, just over North Bridge, and they were going to link it up with Great Union Street. However, due to the efforts of the Hull Civic Society and also the late Chris Ketchell, who was one of Hull's great pioneer conservationists and historians, the building was listed in 1993. It got a good mark when it was restored in 2005, a unique and remarkable survival. It's not used by Annison's now, of course, but it could so easily have been lost. And it's a very attractive building. Looks far better than a big roundabout there. There aren't many of Witham's domestic buildings still to see. All the dense courts and alleyways were cleared before World War II, and further bombing got rid of that. The corner block here at the bottom, 18 to 25 Witham, is of interest. For many years, the second building along at the bottom, almost in the middle at the bottom picture, was shoe retailer Stead & Simpson's. Then a food company next door in the creamy-coloured building, Home and Colonial. Further along, some of the buildings in that block that you can see towards the end at the bottom, and on the right on the top, are Georgian, but most of the Georgian features have been lost over the years. But it still retains evidence of its coaching past. Several coaching inns survive. The first we see, if you look at the top picture, the second building along, was formerly the Holderness New Inn. It replaced an earlier pub, the Holderness Tavern, and was recorded when the North Blockhouse was still standing. But in the 1860s, it changed its name, became the Holderness New Inn, and Hull Brewery rebuilt it in the far more flamboyant style, as you can see. It lasted until the 1960s, and surprisingly, it survived but remained empty till the 1990s, when it had a change of name to Jack Rabbit Slims. That's a nod towards a typical American diner, apparently, as featured in the film Pulp Fiction, I don't know if anybody can correct me on that, because I've never seen the film or been to America, but I'll take the word for it. Directly opposite is another form of coaching inn, the Blue Bell. It was first here recorded in the 1780s or 90s, a very small building, but once again it was rebuilt as a tall 3-storey red brick building by 1850. It ceased to be a pub many, many years ago, and the licence, funnily enough, was transferred to the Five Ways Hotel, which still survives on Boothbury Road. Today the building is shops and offices, but work has been carrying it on to convert it in the upper floors into residential units, I believe. Many interesting internal features survive, and on the left at the bottom you can even see the coaching entrance to this pub. And another rare coaching survival is the Plimsoll's Ship Hotel. It was originally just called the Ship Hotel. It had, but the timber facade was added in 1870s when the owners of the ship changed its name, because there were at least 3 pubs in Hull called the Ship. It was renamed the Plimsoll Ship Hotel as an honour to the MP, Mr. Samuel Plimsoll, whose Merchant Shipping Act had just been passed and had greatly improved the safety and working conditions of seamen. It little changed in over 60 years. Once upon a time it was surrounded by timber yards, as you can see here. That's a picture of it in the 1950s. Many timber yards and taverns, and you can see the trolleybus wires along the top. Today Witham is busy with several interesting new pubs having opened too. Of particular interest here is the old schoolhouse, an imaginative conversion of a Grade 2 listed school, Moulton Street School. It had ceased to be a primary school well before World War II, because the population had nearly all moved away. But the Hull College took over this building, and it became a Grade 2 listed in the 1990s. And when it ceased as a school, it was converted into the old schoolhouse. The Queen Anne-style building was an annex to the Hull College, and that was what saved it till the 90s. It lasted long enough to become a pub, and according to my grandson, who's 16 going on about 18 or 20, it is a very good place. They have quite a lot of events on. We now reach Holderness Road, of course. This is an earlier view of Holderness Road. At the top, it was Blashill's map of Holderness Road, 1865. It shows a very desolate scene. That's the scene from the end of Witham. All you can see are windmills. There were 5 named windmills on that picture at the top, and 2 unnamed ones on the south side of the road. A few buildings had been added by then. There's a map here, and that was before Clarence Street was cut through. You can see Witham on the lower picture. You can see it quite named. Then it does a turn where Holderness Road starts, but there was no other route. Some of these buildings still survive. On the first part of Holderness Road were many windmills. The Blockhouse Mill, which we can see here, it was first recorded in 1775 as a flour mill. But by 1812 it had become a stamper mill, and later on it became a box press mill for linseed oil. By 1904 this changed to an animal feed mill, lasted till the 1947. The name Blockhouse Mill, of course, is because as a reminder of the 3 blockhouses on the east of the river, near to North Bridge. After years of dereliction, unfortunately, the tower disappeared. But the middle buildings and yard still survive. If you look at the second picture on the right, over the 2 surviving buildings, you can see a large expanse of roof and another building. That is the actual Blockhouse Mill, warehouse and store and whatever else. The windmill there gave its name to the Windmill Hotel opposite. It was first recorded, once again, a long time ago, 1807, at this important junction leading to Witham and North Bridge, or along Naylor's Row you could go, and eventually got to Drypool. One of the best examples of glazed tile work in the city. The brewery who built it, William Wheatley of Mightongate, had a liking for building very old pubs and rebuilding them with larger-than-life structures. This is a fine Victorian monument. It's one of the best examples of pub tile work in the city. And once again, that's Grade 2 listed and a great survival. We now move opposite. Some of you may know this, to the opposite corner of Dansome Lane, and hear of the first person who shaped the area. It's synonymous with Hull's most famous son, possibly, Isaac Reckitt, who was in that picture, who went on to found what was for many years Hull's largest private employer. He was born in 1792 and was one of 8 children of Thomas Reckitt of Lincolnshire, Wainfleet in Lincolnshire. The family business passed to his brothers on his father's death in 1819 and left him very poor. He had a failed milling business in Boston due to bad harvests. And then he came to Hull, not a young man, but aged 48, with 7 grandchildren, and purchased a starch house from a man called Samuel Middleton. You can see a picture of the starch house there, and below is a map of Dansome Lane, which you can hopefully see on the illustration there. And the starch house and Starch House Lane run across at right angles. Firstly, Isaac only made starch, but soon there followed laundry blue, then black lead, then, let's see the others. Yes, sorry, black lead. Other products followed, such as Brasso in 1908, Windoline, and later Disprin and Dettol in the 1930s, thereby consolidating a large pharmaceutical business. As it expanded, his sons, James, Francis and Philip, joined the business. However, no mention of Reckitt's would be complete without a mention of Eves Tull's most famous, possibly adopted son, Thomas Robinson Ferrans. He was a railway clerk at Shildon in County Durham and began as a shorthand clerk to Isaac Reckitt's. He made his name on Holderness Road, and he rose through the ranks, works manager, chairman, by the 1870s and 80s, with a huge works. And in 1904, this view of Dansome Lane shows how things have changed. Here's a timeless view of Dansome Lane, probably in the early part of the 20th century, with the usual stream of girls and young people working there. The work ethic of the Reckitt family, who were staunch Quakers, and the Wesleyan Thomas Ferrans, led the company to provide welfare facilities way over and above found in most places. Firstly, as early as 1917, they were given the Francis Reckitt Institute for leisure and sports facilities. James Reckitt, Isaac's son, was responsible for Hull's first garden village, which we'll see later in 1908, where many of its employers lived. Their determination and reward for the company's prosperity did much to develop the city, as we know well today. The Ferrans Art Gallery, Hull University and the land to build it on, the YPI Recreation Ground, the huge extension of East Park with the boating lake and the water chute and other parts, plus almshouses, local charities and Hull's first free library. And still dominating the area, Reckitt's are down Dansome Lane. They've been there since 1842. Here we see a view of their latest addition to the site, a £105 million research and development centre, which is opened in 2019, a fine sign of the company's commitment to Hull. However, there are other interesting buildings in the area. Move along. On the west corner of Dansome Lane, we can see another former public house, first recorded as the Holderness Inn, not the Holderness New Inn. It had a long coaching tradition. The manager of the pub was the Hornsey Coach Guard for about 30 or 40 years. He was a man called Thomas Wing. In the 1890s, the building was Tudorised, as was the fashion, by its owners Bass, Ratcliffe and Gretton. The coaching entry still survives. You see it on the far side of the building. Sadly, it ceased as a pub in 2015, but it's been converted into apartments known as the Holderness, and it retains all the features of the building, so frankly it could have easily been lost. Next door is an early school, believe it or not. The British and Foreign School Society built the Holderness Ward School. If you look at it there, you can see one or two windows which show that it has been a school building. The British and Foreign School Society competed with the Church of England, who owned the National School NSPK, who did a lot to provide education. And this small building, believe it or not, could hold 302 pupils. It was later taken over by the Hull Schools Board in the 1890s and replaced by a new larger school in Williamson Street. Then the building survived as industrial premises. For a long time it was a cabinet maker called Mr. T&T Cass, and that was so certainly into the 1960s. Certainly last but not least, if we look at the right, we see the buildings on the corner of Dansome Lane, 2 and 6 Dansome Lane. If you look at the building on the right, that curves round, it's 2 to 6 Dansome Lane, and number 1 Holderness Road is the painting or rendered building. They're both original buildings dating from the 1850s, but there's never been any attempt to list any of these buildings. The original shop fronts and fenestrations survive. Holderness Road is one of only 2 roads in the city where the original number 1 survives. So many roads have had the number 1s obliterated by bombing or road improvement. So we'll look at some of Holderness Road's earliest buildings in a few minutes. 20 to 24 Holderness Road, which we see there, were built in the early 20th century, and the gap in the middle is cobbled yard and gates. That was the entrance to the blockhouse mill yard that we saw early on. The others have been shops ever since. Next to there is the site of yes, that's a former Hull and Sculcoats dispensary. That was built in the 1920s. It's not a really historic building, but it's a very impressive building. Therefore, the Hull and Sculcoats dispensary provided care and money towards treating people who were ill in the days before the NHS. It was founded in 1799 and it moved to a purpose-built centre which still survives in NHS use in Baker Street. Some of you might remember that as an X-ray centre. It had other branches, and this was the Holderness Road branch. The building still says Hull and Sculcoats dispensary in the decorative work over the doors. It has always been shops downstairs, but above that were waiting rooms, consultants' rooms, and other medical facilities. After 1948, the Hull and Sculcoats Dispensary Trust was wound up and the buildings were disposed of. but it still survives to this day, the Hull and Sculcoats Dispensary Aid Trust, to help people in East Hull. If we move further along Holness Road, we see some of the original buildings on the south side, and these are even earlier. Once again, we rely on Mr. F.S. Smith, the local artist, who was an excellent artist. You can more or less depend on his buildings for the details, and they're all in the right position. This is part of a terrace later numbered 38 to 50 Holness Road. And they were the first houses built on the south side of Holness Road. If you look at those, they had gardens and front doors and bays. Now these are the same buildings in today. This is a 2021 view. Apart from the building in the middle, which might have been lost through a fire or something and was rebuilt on a larger scale, it's easy to picture those buildings and how they are now. Before we look at the newer south side, we must look at some of the interesting buildings near the original terrace, the next terrace along. Here's another picture by F.S. Smith, just round the corner going up to Holness Road. And you can see there's a Presbyterian church and 52, 54, 56 Holness Road, little tiny houses. And just along there's the blockhouse mill that I've told you about. Now that was a picture drawn in by F.S. Smith in the 1880s of buildings that had been put up in the 1820s, with the exception of the church building, which was mid-Victorian. And now if you move along, you can still see part of the church building survives, and also 52, 54 and 56 Holness Road. They still survive. They've been converted back to original houses. Very unusual. Now we'll have a look at the other side of the road. There's a lot of interesting buildings here as well. Let's move on. On the opposite side, they were more imposing, the buildings. You can see here that building at the corner of Dansome Lane, that was called number 1 Holness Road. I showed you it earlier on in one of my pictures. A 2-storey house. And further along was called Wilton Terrace, and it run right along to the corner of Wilton Street, which some of you may know. And it was surmounted on the end of the street by a 3-storey block. Now if you cross the road at the other side of Wilton Street, there was a terrace going up there, still part of Wilton Terrace, and that was surmounted by another 3-storey block. If you look at it, we'll go back to the originals. At number 2, the one on the right of the picture, lived Mr. Cass, the cabinet maker I told you about, actually lived there. If we move along, at number 3 and number 6, Wilton Terrace, lived Thomas Good and Joseph Good, who were ship's chandlers. They had premises at 19 High Street, part of a family who are still eminent in business circles today. Mr. Henry Morrell, a former mayor of Hull, lived at number 8, further along the terrace. And his son Thomas, a ship's chandler, had premises on Great Union Street, and he lived at number 9. And last but not least in the terrace was a Mr. E.S. Humphrey, a sailmaker and ship's chandler. That was in the middle of that block, whose premises were at 158 High Street. Nothing unusual about that, but of course years later that was converted into the Sailmaker's Arms. So it's still a link there with the pub all those years ago. Quite a stellar lineup, you'd agree. Sadly, however, they were more imposing, the houses on that side, but by the 1890s people began to move away, began to move to the leafy suburbs. Number 11, which we can see almost on the right, became a branch of the Hull Cooperative Society, and other buildings became premises for dyers, dry cleaners, butchers, tailors. Strangely, number 17, which we can see on the left, which is the Ritz Club, has been a club for over a century. In 1919, it was the East Hull Conservative and Unionist Club, and today it's the Ritz Show Bar and Function Room. The building on the west side of Wilton Street was William Blackburn and Sons Clothing Merchants, and today it still supplies clothing under the Steady Schoolwear brand. Lots of people with children going at secondary school start to get their clothes from there nowadays. Most the ones in the city centre have nearly all disappeared. We now cross Wilton Street and see the Eastern Building. The large corner building was altered very little since the 1850s, and you can see it's part of a matching pair. For many years it was the Scandinavian Sailors' Temperance Home. Then it became various companies. One was Banks Electrical Wholesalers Limited. I know that because my mother worked there for a long time. One or two houses, however, never succumbed to being made into shops. If we look there, we can see 31 to 33 Holmes Road. Quite unusual that there were individual houses right until the 1960s, and show what the houses would have looked like originally before all the shop fronts were fitted. They're still residential, actually, but they're not single houses. They were, built into either HMOs or apartments, I'm not sure. Another large building, which is of note along there, is a former public benefit boot and shoe company. For many years, they were established on Holness Road, and they were the first multiple retailer of boots and shoes, and brought cheap footwear within reach of the masses. The structure replaced a little shop across the road in 1896. And large monumental stores were a feature of the company. They also had one on Hazel Road, which still survives for a long time, near Courtland Street. It was billed as Hull's largest and smartest shoe store. The ornamental frieze still survives, and if you could enlarge that picture a lot, you'd see above the windows those little motifs of boots and shoes on there. As you can expect, due to the many flour mills and other things, there was a need for milling engineers and millwrights. And in the 1870s, William Priestman left his apprenticeship. He was the son of Samuel Priestman of East Mount in Sutton, and he'd been with Martin Samuelson, Hull's famous iron shipbuilder. He teamed up with a Richard Sizer to do milling engineering and other things, but that wasn't a long success. And soon windmills and other items were becoming obsolete. So he teamed up with his young brother Samuel. One such venture he did was to build a paddle steamer in kit form for use on the Amazon. But the original crane and excavator company had its origin in an expedition to get treasure from a sunken galleon in Vigo Bay off Spain, which used the first ever Priestman grab. Within a few years at this site, Priestman grabs were being built and used all over the world in harbours and ports. Despite the expedition to Spain never being a success, the company was on its way. Soon the works covered both sides of Williamson Street, Holness Road. The business developed further. Another major achievement was in the 1880s, they built, you can see a picture there, the world's first commercially produced oil engine or diesel engine, which won an award from the Royal Agricultural Society. They categorically state that it was the world's first, of course, would be challenged. Parallel research was being carried on both in West Yorkshire and in Germany and Rudolf Diesel eventually was the vital catalyst, and the first diesel lorry was produced by him a few years after in the 1890s. We can't be certain. And they had other accolades as well. In 1894, they used an oil engine to power a small vehicle to shunt wagons on the Alexander Dock, the North Eastern Railway. Possibly the first recorded use of the internal combustion engine for this. Here's a picture of one of them being trialled in their works down Williamson Street in the lower picture. Oh dear, it's getting bad. Yes, but you must agree it was cutting-edge technology, all performed by local businesses in a small yard off Holness Road. And only 30 years later, the forerunner of the JCB, the world's first small excavator, was built down Williamson Street. In 1925, examples of the oil engine and the excavator were fortunately preserved by Hull Museums when Priestman's closed in the 1980s, making 1,500 staff redundant. They latterly moved to Marfleet, of course. They didn't last very long on Williamson Street, but they had a long history. Also down Williamson Street was a famous person who was born. Just around the corner, you can see 4 houses, and then there's a gap at number 1 East Parade. Sorry, number 20 Williamson Street, just round the corner from those houses you can see. Mr. Jack Harrison, VC, was born in 1890. He was the son of John Harrison, who was a boilermaker at Earl's Shipyard, which wasn't far away on Victoria Dock. He had a notable career on the rugby field because his 52 tries were, in a season, still, as far as I understand, a Hull FC record. And he had a distinguished career on the battlefield. Sadly, in World War I, it cost him his life, this gallant deed. He was awarded the Victoria Cross, the only rugby league player ever to have achieved this. And he was born and brought up just round the corner from here. He died in 1917. Excuse me. We now move along the road. As I stated earlier, the road began to decline and became more of a neighbourhood centre than a smart residential area. We now look at 2 of the road's finest public buildings. First of all, the James Reckitt Public Library. It's named because James Reckitt, son of Isaac, gave a gift of £6,000 to build and maintain a free library for the people of Hull in 1889. The corporation had been empowered to do that since 1855, but they weren't acting very well, very quickly. The Free Libraries Act had given them the power, but it wasn't till James Reckitt had shown what could be done that they took up an option, and a few years later they built a central library in Hull. After many years, sadly, the library was replaced by one further up the road in a new retail development, but it was converted into apartments. You can see it there. It belongs to Hull Serviced Apartments, and that secures the future of another Grade 2 listed building. Also next to it is the first swimming bath built east of the river in 1898. The corporation had an open swimming facilities to east of the river, but this was the first actual all-enclosed swimming pool to be built. It opened in 1898 and was refurbished in 1986 and won a Civic Society Good Mark. Sadly, it's been closed and its future is uncertain because they built a new pool at the Woodford Centre. There are plans to convert it into apartments, so hopefully the building will survive another day. And once more other buildings like that have been converted. The building you see next to it, on the left of my picture, was, believe it or not, built in, let's see when it was, built in 1890 as a whole cooperative shop, and it was such a lovely shop that it had a tea room up above on the site of some various houses that were demolished. The above lost its top floor in World War II damage, but surviving it, strangely enough, it's lived on to become converted into apartments again. So really it's to be hoped the whole line can be restored and eventually brought back into use. We're now at Franklin Street, and we see sorry, I'm just moving along a bit, yes. We're now in Brazil Street now. An interesting survival is 114 to 126 Holness Road. Of course, there's only one of two surviving three-storey tenement blocks on Holness Road with shops below. They date from the 1890s. Opposite is the site of Ellis Terrace, where I was more or less stood to take the picture. Ellis Terrace was one of the worst incidents of World War II in Hull. A parachute mine destroyed a communal shelter, killing at least 50 people, and 500 people were made homeless. Entire households perished in the tragedy, and residents of the terrace and nearby and the building in the picture were replaced, but there's still a gap at the end of the block, as you can see on the picture on the left, where you can see the scars from the bombing all those years after. Now, why they did this area is apparent later. 3 months later, the Luftwaffe finally succeeded in their mission to destroy the giant Reckitt's works, which I showed you earlier, which were about less than a quarter of a mile from there, in Dansom Lane. In 18th of July 1941, the raid was so large and such magnitude that the Air Ministry actually allowed Hull to be mentioned in news reports rather than just the anonymous northeast coast town that most of the news reports mentioned. 75% of the complex was destroyed. So serious was Hull's plight that the then Prime Minister Winston Churchill came along to see a couple of months after. Here he is visiting Hull on Holness Road, almost the spot where the previous photograph was taken of the shops. Beside him was Hull's Lord Mayor on Winston's left, and then further along was the Sheriff, Councillor and Chief Air Raid Warden, Mr. Robert Greenwood Tarrant. He was a noted builder whose wartime service was absolutely exemplary. But I don't know if some of you may have heard, but his business dealings before and after the war left a lot to be desired. However, things did progress, fortunately. The Germans couldn't deprive the HM forces of such essential items as Dettol and Harpic and Disprin. Production was soon transferred elsewhere, and in 1949, Reckitt's began to rebuild on Dansom Lane. In 1952, we can see the first new office block was built. It was opened by Mrs. Arnold Reckitt, and soon after, 470 people moved into brand new offices. In 2 years, here they are, appropriately decorated for the coronation in 1953, and East Hull's major employer was essentially back in business. Another building we see along here, just a bit further up, was West Corn Mill. This is important. It was only the engine house to two mills, a flour mill at one side and an oil mill at the other side. But it was the mill where Mr. Joseph Rank, another famous Hull son, who was born on Holderness Road in 1854, began work. He was like the Reckitt's, he was one of a family of 12, and there was no certainty that he would inherit his father's mill. So when his father died in 1874, he took his legacy and first of all started with a small windmill on Holderness Road, but then rented part of West's mill, which we see there, with a Thomas Richardson. Unfortunately for Joseph Rank, Thomas Richardson had the first use of the mill, on the busiest days, so he did struggle a bit at first, but by the 1870s, windmills were being rapidly replaced, and it was vital to increase flour supplies to provide food for all these masses. Steam mills were being used, dependent not on the wind. Fortunately, Joseph's new business in this West mill succeeded. By the 1880s, he'd recovered his losses and owned an impressive residence, Chestnut Villas, further up Holderness Road. The mill buildings miraculously survived into the 20th century. It was latterly used into the 1980s as a store and a warehouse for a fireplace manufacturer. Fortunately, somebody saw the potential of the building to be converted into a hotel, and we can see the building today. It recently had a new extension and a new public restaurant added, and I think there are plans for further developments. There we are, the Cornmill Hotel it is. It's well worth a visit. Of course, parts of the road changed completely compared with how they used to look. Just beyond there, the road narrowed. Just ahead, the level crossing and the South Coast passenger station were there. The beginning of the platform is just on the right of the picture, just on the right of the train we can see going through. It was part of the sadly missed Holland Holderness Railway, which ran to Willemsea and closed in 1964. Firstly, we see the busy area near the station. There's shops stretching almost to the edge of the line. Some of you may remember in Waistell's, the tailor's shop there. Then there was Lipton's grocers, and there was Pedder's tiny tripe shop, which was almost next to the railway line. You almost had to lean on the gate when you were going in, from memory. However, the post-war development plan envisaged industry from the area. Next we see a picture of busy Beaton Street, which led from near the station right through to Danson Lane. By the 1970s, the houses were all demolished and replaced by a new factory for Reckitt's called Kingston Works South. All that was left of the first view, where we can see with the two trolleys and the Guinness clock, is a little cobbled road, and at the back of that is Reckitt's new extension, which opened in about the 1980s, I believe. The station and the railway sadly vanished. Due to the beaching plan, the Willemsea line closed in October 1964, and the freight services to Victoria Docks soon after. These fine views of South Coast Station made way for a new road linking Stone Ferry, Holderness Road and Heddon Road. The road was named Mount Pleasant and led to the loss of many more homes, finally being developed as the Mount Pleasant Retail Park, which we can see traffic moving to and from there, which opened in about 1987. It was the death knell for many small shops in the area, which was also widened, causing a lot of buildings to go. This view of the road 60 years ago is very different to today. We see such long-forgotten names as Rediffusion, who you could rent televisions from, Save Plenty Stores, and Aubrey's Super Save, all in that block. Probably the forerunners of the present-day pound shops, Gallons and Home and Colonial. Today, only the end of the terrace survives, with about 4 or 5 shops there. Notable at the end, however, the corner shop is a former chemist shop, which in the 1970s became the first branch of Heron Foods. It's not that now, they moved further down the road, but it's quite notable that a large enterprise like that sprung from a tiny shop in the area. So it's onwards and upwards. Now, onwards we pass under the Hull and Barnsley Railway Bridge, a feature of the road since the line was opened in 1885, and upwards to see the area's only high-rise flats. Dennerby Court, built in 1961. Sorry, I couldn't resist this view of another trolley bus. It's overtaking a lovely yellow Clover milk float. I'll go on for about another quarter of an hour if I can. Is that all right? Yes. Okay, thank you. Yes, let's just get them. Sorry, yes, I'll be available to answer questions after that. Don't worry. Just 13. Yes. I hope you're enjoying it now. Now we pass a slight. Oh, sorry now. Trouble when you. East Hull was always known as the Christian side of the river because the number of public houses was far exceeded by the number of active churches. There were only 3 coaching inns along Holness Road. This one, the oldest one, was the Elephant and Castle. It's a common name for pubs. It's something to do with the Worshipful Company of Cutlers. It opened in 1874 as a little beer-only house, and on Barnsley Street. It was extended gradually, but it lost its roof in World War II, and later it became the Elephant and Castle. It was little changed for many years, but sadly closed as a pub in 2015, and now enjoying its new renaissance as Chicken George, a cafe takeaway. The Barnsley Street area had some of the worst slums, and the earliest to be cleared in 1959. Over 400 unfit homes were designated in that area. Some moved into the high-rise block of flats like we saw, but an awful lot moved to the East Hull Estates. East Hull Estates being Long Hill, Bilton Grange and Greatfield. If we move along now, we pass another lost terrace of 1870, Filey Parade. Right on the left of the building that we see was a small terrace where Mr. T.R. Ferrens lived when he moved to Hull in 1870. Adjoining the terrace in the 1890s was a large branch of the expanding William Jackson and Sons, numbered 299 to 305. It was a second branch on Holderness Road. They had one not far from where the public benefit boot and shoe shop was. It had all sorts of departments: butchery, fruit shop, bakery, general grocery. Today it's used by other retailers. One is the Lucky Star takeaway. I can't quite read who the others are because it's not in front of me. But the Jackson's name can still be read on the parapet of the building. Needless to say, after World War II, there was no trace of the terrace and of the building where Mr. Ferrens lives, and other modern buildings occupy the site. Another major retailer who came to the road was Woolworth in 1937, opened at the corner of Holland Street. Already established in the city centre since 1911, this was a major boost to the road. But sadly, it closed in 1989, and the Art Deco shop still exists. It became a bank at first, but it was partly converted into a Heron store, and they now have the whole building. The top picture shows it as Woolworth, and the bottom picture is a more modern 70s or 80s picture showing, well, Must be late 80s, 90s picture showing the Heron store. We move along to see the next surviving terrace along here. This is at the corner of Mersey Street. It's a little changed. 319 to 327 Holders Road in the 1930s housed a stationer's, a Bible shop, walk-ups, boot and shoe repairers with two other shops on the road, Scott's undertaker, and lastly you can see the hanging sign with Seaby, the picture framing specialist. Just beyond is a very impressive Brunswick chapel built in 1877 when the area was being developed. It was a magnificent building in the Italianate style with Corinthian columns and was replaced by a modern church in 1962, which we see in the picture. Sadly, that building was demolished, but the modern new church continues to be used and is a very popular feature of Holness Road. Part of the original church, survives in Durham Street. That was their educational institute, but that has since been converted into apartments. Next we go along with the other modern small shops. Here at number 319 Holness Road, which was formerly a Lloyd's Bank, is an acupuncture centre. 322 is an optician, and beyond is a deli and sandwich bar, and then a pizza shop. We finish with the site near to Durham Street. Yeah. 339 to 347 all date from the 1880s. This 1950s view shows some long forgotten and long respected names from the past. Gordon Roach, a fishmonger. Very, very suitable name if you think about it for a fishmonger. Next door is 345, a hairdresser's shop, George Metcalf. Today it's a modern hairdresser's as well, still used. It's Holness Barbers. Next door at 347 were Turner Brothers, electrical engineers. They actually were established in the 1930s and were a major retailer of televisions and radios and radiograms, of course, a new phenomenon. And they actually came out to repair them if there were any problems. Quite amazing. You didn't just stick them in a skip or dump them in the street like they do nowadays. At 319, just beyond Turner Brothers, was Bob Sewell, who started as a Hull's working man's fruiterer. He was a former barrow boy who still opened in the street on the road in the 1950s. And the Sewells are still part of the retail trade in Hull to this day. If we look at the present parade here, 337 we see Durham Villa, which was originally a house. For many years it's been an optician's, Bush Opticians. Before we leave the block next door, this next to it, which is Estelle, was East Hull's record store, Regis Records. What happy memories flood back of countless bike rides from my home to purchase the latest vinyl single for 6 and 8 by stars such as Cliff Richard, the Beatles, the Shadows, to name but 3. And if the shop wasn't busy, you could sit inside and listen in one of their soundproof booths to what you'd bought. Today, instead of record bars and record shops, TV and radio, the shop provide a convenience store, a wig and hair extension shop, the Estelle Aesthetics, which is where the record shop was, and a shop called Amazing Animal Accessories, where Turner Brothers was, which specialise in animal cages. We move along even a bit further now and see what was John Coupland, a large furniture shop on the other side of the road near to Morrill Street. And just beyond there, above the Ford, I think it's a Ford Cortina, just above the front of that, was Eddie's, which was a fascinating shop, and Mr. Eddie Adlard, who did hairdressing at the back of the shop, and over and above, he had a marvellous toy and gift and model shop, even selling things like dinky toys. That closed in the 1980s. The parade is little changed architecturally. As you look at it now, as such traders as vaping shops, nail bars, a charity shop, Bernardo's, to name but three. Yes, the town was certainly growing, obviously helped by Hull Street tramways. They had a horse tram network by the 1870s covering most of the major roads in Hull, running from the town centre on Holden's Road to Lee Street. They had a frequent daytime service till superseded by electric trams. The horse tram depot is a very rare survivor. It still survives in Jesmond Gardens, just a little bit on the corner from the shops I showed you. It's now converted into offices, but the building was for many years warehouse of Brook and Sons, hardware retailers, and in the 50s and 60s it was a drive-through car wash where you drove in and they didn't have the automatic brushes and things, I don't think. They actually came and sort of set to on your car and got on with it. Next we see Chestnut Villas, built in 1880s. Superior houses, where the rich and the famous lived. Alfred Gelder, the noted architect, lived at number 365, yes, and his friend and client, Joseph Rank, the master miller, who's pictured there as well, lived at 371. And that's where his son, J. Arthur Rank, the famous film magnate and possibly father of the British film industry, was born. There are plaques on those two buildings put up by the Civic Society a few years ago to commemorate the fact. Large gardens were the order of the day, very different from the road's early terraces and poor houses. And just along the road was Garden Village. This was created by Sir James Reckitt in 1907-13 for workers at his factory. The Reckitt family were Quakers, and James and his fellow Quakers, like Joseph Rowntree in York and George Cadbury, provided garden villages which enabled many workers to live a short distance away from the factory in better spacious homes with gardens and other facilities. Runton and Barry, the local architects, actually took part did the development. It was to seem absolutely idyllic. The village was part of the estate of T.R. Ferrand's, Holderness House, one of the road's earliest buildings, which belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Jalland, who rebuilt it in 1838 in the style shown in the picture. Mr. Ferrand's, as he progressed up the tree at Reckitt's, finally purchased the building from the now widowed Mrs. Jalland and 130 acres of land, and built his garden village along with his friend James Reckitt. The large house which we see here was for many years a care home, but due to changes in the requirements of care homes nowadays, it is closed and is now being looking for a new use. Now that's Holderness House, and that's the memorial to Mr. Ferrand's. Soon, stylish houses followed along the main road, nothing like the old terraces we saw before, with large gardens. 348, a neat, stylish Victorian villa with a prominent porch, was built in 1889 as a home for a well-known physician and surgeon, Mr. Horace Watts. From the 1960s to 1980s, it was a day centre and base for the children's charity Bernardo's New Family in Humberside, a very successful and highly regarded facility in the Hull area. And the other buildings we can see along here were totally different to how things used to look. Just have to step back one. I'll have to finish this in 5 minutes, actually, if I can. This was the Bank Public House, formerly Hull Savings Bank, a classically designed building built in 1920. It closed in 1989, and it's now the Bank Public House. There was considerable building in the area going on. And this followed the bombing that took place, of course. Sorry. There was considerable bombing in the area, even though mainly residential, with gaps remaining to this day. A notable casualty was the party-built church of St. Columba's, which we can see in the top corner here. The original church had been built in the 1930s, but it hadn't even been consecrated when it was bombed. It was rebuilt and completed in the 1950s in the same style, and a second foundation stone was laid by the then Princess Royal in 1958. That was the sister of King George VI, not the present one. And this was 30 years after she'd laid the original stone. So the church survives till today, and it can boast two foundation stones laid 30 years apart by the same member of the royal family. The parish church of Drypool, which we see in the picture underneath, was moved from near the level crossings in the 1980s to there, as more of the population were there. Another loss was Westcott House at the corner of Westcott Street. It had been the home of a successful solicitor, Thomas Priestman, a brother of the crane and excavator Priestman. It was bombed in 1941. And the building we see here, rather brutalistic styled Westcott House, was built in the 50s with 24 new private apartments, the first such development in East Hull since the war. It still survived. Just further along the street lived his brothers of crane and excavator fame. They had their family homes just yards away in Westcott Street. 31 Cleveland Villas and the 33 Novara, where Samuel and William Priestman both live. And we now see other attractive houses, but we're getting to the point where we're going to have to draw bring this to a close. The top picture here, Wood Grange, is a highly decorated, jetted, half-timbered facade with a tile-hung gable, to quote the books, and a conical turret. That was built for Frederick Reckitt, Isaac's son, who was a chemist. A very fine villa. And next to it was the Wood Grange, the one on the top, was for many years a residence. Then it became a Christian Science church, and in 2012 it became a B&B, and now it's a 12-room apart hotel, securing an excellent building. And next below, before we get to Summergangs Road, the last one we see is the former Drypool Vicarage. A notable early resident was Canon Berry, who moved to Drypool in 1914 and was there for 33 years. And he saw all the Zeppelin raids in the First World War and the tremendous bombing in the Second World War, and described the area as the most bombed parish in the most bombed town in England. Following the war and the new St. Columba's Church, a new vicarage was built beyond St. Columba's, and the house became a care home, the Pink Panther Care Home. I think now we're going to have to finish the talk. I hope you've enjoyed and seen that there's a lot of interest in Holderness Road, east of the river. A lot of what the city is today is still a reflection on some of the people who lived in the area. If I'd had a bit longer, I could have shown you up by East Park and other things, such as almshouses provided by Thomas Ferrans, and the boating lake and bridge and that area of East Park provided by Mr. Ferrans. And also it has a second garden village, the BOCM Garden Village, which is very interesting, because that was built by the oilseed crushing firms as a garden village to them in 1921. It was also different to Reckitt's Garden Village because it had a big sports ground and a running track and tennis courts, all sorts of things. Once again, there were marvellous houses built in the English cottage style. You can see them there. These are views today. Oh, looks very now. Willows Avenue, which was mock Tudor. That was a bequest to by one of the directors of the British Oil and Cake Mills, and that was built with his money. And that shows why there's so much to see in Holderness Road. We've barely reached 2 miles from the city centre. And I thank you very much for listening to the talk today, and hopefully, are there any questions? Sorry? Sorry, I can't hear you properly. I can go. Thank you. Thank you very much. I've very much enjoyed coming, and yeah, sometime I'll be able to work a bit faster, but it just depends. Fine, yes.
I'll do the wrapping up bit. I'll try to keep it short-ish. Just to help my voice carry, I'll stay nearish the microphone. Thank you everyone for attending, those of you who have managed to stick around. If I need to do a pub crawl in East Hall, I'll just rewatch the first bit of that presentation and just go through the list. I know, it's fantastic. Like I said at the beginning of this talk, this is part of our 600th year anniversary. We're coming to the end of the year, obviously, and the end of the celebratory year, but we do have a lot of history and heritage still to share with you all. You'll have seen the development of a stained glass tour on one of the pamphlets on your seats today. There's only one date on there at the minute, January 24th, but there's going to be more dates added, so please keep your eye out for that, for either pamphlets or on our website on socials. This is also the last talk before Christmas. The next talk afterwards is going to be on the 9th of January, which is actually a talk from myself, talking about Gassy Jack Dayton, a guy who was born in Brook Street, not far from here, only about a minute's walk from my place, just past the Central Library there, who went and became the founding father of Vancouver, the city where I'm from. So quite a lot of mixed heritage there. So he has a fantastic self-made man's story, and without trying to spoil too much while still trying to sell my own talk here, it is an unbelievable story. The guy really got screwed over quite badly in his time on the west coast of the United States and Canada, but lives and has a fantastic legacy. As per usual, I usually plug the cafe at this point, so go grab your lunch at the cafe. And I feel like I'm among the company of people who have done their Christmas shopping quite early. But in case you need to pick up anything last minute, please pick something up at the Minster shop, because we have quite a lot there that's quite good. And last but not least, as I always end these talks with, if you can please, I know that it's difficult in December with Christmas time. We're quite tight on the purse strings at this time of the year, but if you can make a donation for this church, because nothing says church and Christmas throughout history like buildings like this, and we want to be able to provide those Christmas and Advent memories to people in the future. So if you can make a donation for us at some point, please do. And since it's my last time in front of you before Christmas, please all have a very merry and blessed Christmas and Advent period, and hopefully I'll see you all soon. Thank you very much. Yeah. They are £5. They're £5. Yes, I've already been told that there might be something that needs updating on that. Throw a price on there just to make it a bit more obvious. But yes, get on the graphic design team.